This is the last episode of 2023. Join me today as we break it all down. Back-to-back games that end the year, as well as our hopes and dreams for 24. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked on Lightning.
You're Locked on Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked on Lightning, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked on Lightning. Before we jump into all our topics today, I just want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On this episode of Locked on Lightning, we're looking towards the end of 2023, talking about the back-to-back games the Lightning will have to end the year, as well as looking back on the year itself for the Tampa Bay Lightning, as well as displaying or really laying out our hopes and dreams and wishes for 2024. Before we get into all that, please, I just want to ask you so humbly one last time for 2023 to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead, subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button below this video, and comment below to join the conversation, as well as let me know what your hopes and wishes are for this Lightning team in 2024. Remember, that also spans two halves of two separate seasons. So a lot of things that you could say there. So before we get into that later on, let's talk about these last two games of the year, not the season, the year, as the Tampa Bay Lightning take on the New York Rangers on tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at home, as well as another game Sunday night, the 31st, New Year's Eve, at home against the Montreal Canadiens. And like I've said numerous times to exhaustion on this podcast, these last week of games have been really going to have been a tough test for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you know, I will say though, they have done so much better up until this point in time than I really would have given them a lot of credit for or had my expectations at. You had, you had Vegas, which was a game in which I was very cautiously optimistic. If you remember at the time, it was one of those games where it could have gone very well or it could have gone very bad for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and it went very well and bad. Ironically enough, just a little recap. Probably one of my favorite games of the year, really, thus far that the Lightning have played. Jumping out. Falling behind 2-0 early on, and then scoring 4 unanswered goals off of my highlight of 2023. Really, that's really what it comes down to. Probably mine, at least, and maybe that's a little bit recency bias, but when the Lightning are so hot and cold as they have been throughout the last couple of seasons, recency bias is not a bad thing to have, especially when it comes to positivity. Brandon Hagel sparking the 4-goal output in that second period there for the Lightning, eventually winning the game on a Nick Paul goal with a minute and a half left in the third period. But they go after that into a game where, once again, I didn't really have high expectations for them. They win in a shootout in Washington right before the Christmas break. Everything looks good for the Lightning as they are winners of their last 3. Lightning looking like they're really cooking. And of course, in Lightning fashion, they get hot right before they have a couple of days off. And then they come out, as we all know, the other night, lose in a not so good output in this one against your in-state rivals, a team that really shocked everybody in the NHL last year. And now you get to bring back some good nostalgia. As we know, the Lightning and the Rangers played not too long ago in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I really think that, if there's ever a good game to win where you're really going to get going and get a groove on, it's against one of the best teams in the NHL. And you know, we kind of get to see how they're stacked up tonight because they are currently playing the New York Rangers and the Florida Panthers, excuse me. So you kind of get a tale of, you know, two worlds in terms of, you know, how you stack up. You know, if they lose to the Panthers and you know, we beat them, you know, in lightning math, are we just as good as the Panthers? Maybe, who knows, or vice versa, or however way you want to rationale it. But really, I think that the Ranger game is going to be really, and the Rangers are winning 3-2, by the way, in the third period, and it's really interesting. It's really going to be interesting to me how this game unfolds because, like I said, you know, there is some history there between these two teams. These two teams not only have played each other recently, but they played each other numerous times in the playoffs. So, I mean, obviously, the most recent one that counts is the one in which the Lightning won, in which they were down early in that series just a couple of years ago. But the Rangers are the best team in the East right now. They're 3 points ahead of the Bruins. They might very well be the team. Let me just double check. They could, with a win tonight, they could be the first team to hit 50 points on the season. And they have a very good team top to bottom. And then, you know, this is a game where I fully expect the Lightning to come out and play well because for whatever reason, I don't know if it's just hockey being stupid or if it's just, you know, just how players prepare themselves for certain matchups. And I'm not here to accuse anybody of taking teams lightly and maybe, you know, not showing up early when you need to against teams that are feisty as opposed to being on top of your game against teams that are very good. But for whatever the reason is, for the most part, the Lightning do show up against very good teams. So I expect a very good output of effort and grit and performance on Saturday afternoon against the New York Rangers. The Rangers have one of the better goal differentials in the league as well. They are fifth in the league, excuse me, plus 23. And you know, I look at it this way, you know, you look at the teams above them in terms of points in the league itself. The Rangers, the Canucks, the Knights, the Bruins, the Lightning, and the Avalanche, actually. The Lightning have played those teams and all those teams. And so you kind of look at that and you wonder, you know, as we always often do on this podcast, you know, where do the Lightning stack in terms of the best teams? Because that's the goal for this team, is to be one of the top teams in the league. And I still think, you know, if everything turns out, and that kind of ties in with my wishes for this year, for 24, is, you know, I hope the Lightning could be one of the better teams in the league. And it all starts, I think, now, you know, and you know, that may be a little bit of cliche because, you know, I feel like I say this all the time where, you know, what better way to get on a winning streak after a loss than right now? The game that's right now, you know. And what better way to do it against the Rangers, who, like I've said, are a very good team. You're going to get a good goaltending matchup regardless, because there will be Vasilevsky will be in net for this one. I fully expect him to be in net for the game against the Canadians too. I mean, there's really no excuse not to play him, considering this team will have a couple of days off to relax and you know, I think Cooper wants to definitely, or I would imagine Cooper wants to get these two games wrapped up and signed with a W before the season 23 ends. And especially when you have a tough stretch. I mean, you could also play Johansson against Winnipeg to start out the new year. But this is two very good teams in the New York Rangers, especially that Rangers team. You got Quick and Shesterkin, who are going to play you tough. You got Trouba. I'm not sure if he's back from his injury yet, but him and Lindgren are going to cause problems for the Lightning, at least for our top guys. They're definitely going to be this is definitely going to be a physical game. And you're going to see a lot of penalties called, I would imagine. You're going to see a lot of TV time on Jacob Trouba, Ryan Lindgren, as well as on the Lightning side from Tanner Jeannot. Nick Paul, I definitely think he's going to get his number called Brandon Hagel. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets into a scrap as well. That's where this game is going to be won. Who's going to be the tougher team and who's not going to crack as well. And I think that if the Lightning could win that game, I think we could almost pencil in a win against Montreal because, Montreal is a good team. They're a team that I think a lot of people didn't realize at least were going to be this decent this far into the season. I think a lot of people, if you look at the standings, kind of would have assumed that the Sabres were going to be at least higher in the standings. And I know that only separates those two teams is 3 points, but at the same time, I mean, the Canadiens are a good young team and they're kind of a team I look at, whereas and I talk about them, I kind of compare them to how the Red Wings were the last 4 years. And I think that's where the Canadiens are now. The Red Wings are turning into that team that's going to be a perennial force in this division for years to come. I think they're just two pieces off, but Canadians are gonna play us tough, and I think that if as long as you start the weekend on a good note, I think that you're setting yourself up for a pretty good result on Sunday night to end the year. So let me know in the comments below. I'm throwing out, I think, really my first prediction of the year. If you've been a listener of this podcast for a while, I love to throw out my predictions. And I haven't really done it this year. I just kind of wanted to unfold the season to unfold and see where the Lightning are. And I think that this is going to be the first one of the year. Now, obviously, if the Lightning do lose tomorrow night, I look like an idiot, but I'm going to say it right now. The Lightning will sweep the last 2 games of 2023 to go into the new year on a 2-game winning streak. So let me know in the comments below how you feel about that. And coming up, we'll be looking back on Tampa's year, especially this year, and kind of just reflect on it as well as, compare it to past years. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about one of our sponsors today on the show, and that is our friends over at AG1. Now, if you haven't heard about AG1, people, listen up. It's the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. I drink it literally every day. I gave AG1 a try because, listen, I can't always get to the gym, but I at least try to stay healthy and at least consume things that are not only good for my health, but also help me with gut health, because that's the big thing now these days is if you're feeling good in your gut, you're feeling good overall. And boy, it's 100% true. I want it, and it also helps just your general, your energy, your immune support, all that stuff. And I hated taking pills, so that's why I drink AG1 every morning with my bowl of cereal and my morning coffee, and it makes me feel unstoppable. Like when Brandon Hagel fought Ivan Barbashev last week against the Vegas Golden Knights. How he made me feel, that's how AG1 makes me feel. So you got to get on this because, listen, it takes all your vitamins in one, and it makes you feel super, super healthy and ready to take on the day. So, and my favorite part about it is that it also costs less than $3 a day. Pretty good if you ask me. It's a really effective daily habit with high quality sourced ingredients. Win-win. So it's a comprehensive solution is what you need for your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's ag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. And if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification button so as soon as the newest episode drops, you'll be notified. And drop a comment below. Get in on the conversation. Let me know, what is your feelings going into this last series of the year, as well as, how do you feel about 2023 as a whole? The last 12 months have been pretty interesting to say the least for this Tampa Bay Lightning team, as they went from a team that could potentially, remember to start 2022-23, we were talking about how this team could potentially make 4 Stanley Cup finals in a row. And then, of course, it was kind of very evident early on that that may not be the case. And it's wear and tear, and we all know the story by now. But just to refresh those that maybe have not been along for the ride for as long with this Lightning team, they were unable to go back to the Stanley Cup final. Actually, not even that. They weren't able to advance past the first round. That was against their heated rivals, the Toronto Maple Leafs, where I will say, that even though it was disappointing, the result, and the Lightning were down pretty early in that series, I will say the thing about that series, it showed me that, even though the Lightning did not have the energy to physically go toe to toe with this Toronto team. I mean, they almost faced the game. They almost forced the game 7, which I mean was very impressive within itself, given the amount of mileage on this Tampa Bay Lightning team. But coming back and almost forcing a game 7, at least bringing it to 6, I will say that they made up for the lack of energy with the surplus of heart, the surplus of fight. They still had that fire in them. And coming into this 2023 season, the start or the last part, I guess, of this 2023 year, um, I've seen little spurts of that with this team, that championship fight. The two big examples, of course, I'm sure some of you already know where I'm going with this, is the Boston game early on in the season. The Lightning and that's just a Lightning thing too. I feel like whenever the Bolts run into the Bruins, especially when they're still trying to find their identity, I still think that whenever they run into Boston, I think it's just because when I look at the Atlantic Division real quick, not to get sidetracked, but when I look at the Atlantic Division, I know it's over the last couple of years, it's morphed into Toronto, but I still, especially when the Lightning were at the peak of their powers, contending for the title every year in the division, I always looked at the Bruins as your rival, as the Lightning's rival. And I still do, and I still think a lot of these players who have been on this team for a while still do as well. And they see the success that this Boston team, this core, well, the core that was around last year, Bergeron's gone. You don't really have many guys left over, especially with Chara gone as well. Marchand's really the only one that's left. The Lightning look at that, and even though they have won more cups than that core, I think they're still hungry to prove that they're better. And we all know that, Boston gets their flowers all the time for this great franchise. And, that whole Bruins core that, with all those players I had, including Tuukka Rask, those guys, they're looked at as this phenomenal group of players. And if I had to guess, I would probably say all of them are going to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I think that the Lightning, I don't know if the players are conscious of this, but I know the fans are. And I know that as people who follow this team on a yearly basis, on a daily basis, the Lightning core of Point, Cooch, Head, Stamkos, Vasilevsky, I'll even throw Chernak in there, and Head, Sergachev. I will say those guys, they don't get enough credit. You look at what they've done compared to what Boston's done. And I'm sure that's probably why you see a little bit, pep in their step whenever those two teams cross paths. And I feel like that's almost kind of like the same thing, even though, this group of Rangers players hasn't really been able to get really, they've been on a weird path the last 5 years where they weren't good, and then they were good a little bit, and then they weren't good, and then they got Lafreniere, and then Panarin, and all that stuff. Not necessarily in that order, but I think that that is the one thing, if I had to guess, other than the pure competitiveness from this team, I think when you look at this Lightning team and that's the one thing I think we should all look for in 2024 with them, because, they may not play as well and they may not rise to the occasion against certain teams, which is fine. I get it. Like, the Lightning just don't stack up well against good teams in certain teams, excuse me. Um, and it is what it is, and that's something. It's kind of a learning experience for that team, because it still is the regular season. There's still a lot of hockey to be played, but in 23, I think that's the one thing you could take is that they still didn't lose that championship mindset. And even through the ups and downs, even through last season, where really I was just so disgusted with that team, except for the month of February. I thought that, this team lost it in terms of that championship mindset. And yeah, like I said, the results aren't what we wanted them to be, but um with that, with the positive ending, even though it wasn't really a positive ending, the losing the series, but the way they lost like champions. And these last couple of games against very big teams, the Bruins and the Knights, uh, those I even said it during the Vegas recap, that was a Stanley Cup final atmosphere. And it all starts from the players. And that's what I want to see on a nightly basis from this team. And a lot of people criticize me. They say, why are you so hard on this team? Why are you so negative? Well, that's the reason why. This team, I know they could accomplish big things. They were close to possibly accomplishing something like that once again in 23. Unfortunately, they didn't do it, but hopefully they could remember that and bring some of that nostalgia when I talk about that into this upcoming game against the New York Rangers. So let me know, what were your takeaways from 2023 for the Tampa Bay Lightning? I mean, we don't have enough time on this show to talk about just individual players, but Brandon Hagel and Nikita Kucherov and Nick Paul, if you were going to do the three stars of this Lightning team for 23, it would be those guys. And I'd probably say it's Cooch, Paul, and Hagel, because those are the three guys that are really going 200 feet every night for this team. So let me know who you really impressed you and stood out to you from this year. And in just a bit, we're going to talk about our hopes and wishes for 2024. And I'm sure everybody has a lot of them. So go ahead and drop them in the comments below. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk about our last sponsor, our last ad read of the year. And that is our friends over at Sleeper. Now, listen, it's almost the halfway point in the season, Lightning fans. And Lightning, like I said, this team is peaks and valleys, and we just got to hold on tight, especially when we go down the peak into the valley. And regardless, though, of where we are in the standings, I just want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether guys like Hagel, Paul, or Nikita Kucherov will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. So use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. And I just want to thank everybody real quick for making it a very, very, once again, another incredible year here on Locked On Lightning. I mean, your enthusiasm, your correspondence, whether you're in just reaching out to me through the comments on YouTube or reaching out to me on Twitter. And if you want to, it's at Danky Dank, DENKYD8NK. Whether you're tweeting to me or messaging me on the side, I just want to thank all of you because, without you, I would just be sitting here talking to a microphone. Whereas with your constant enthusiasm and our conversations, I actually feel like I'm talking to each and every one of you. So I thank you for that. And I'm really excited about going into 2024 and to see what that brings, not only for the Tampa Bay Lightning, but for the podcast as well. As we will be going into our February, we'll be making 4 years here on Locked On Lightning. So that's pretty cool and still crazy to think about. But so my wish, we're talking about wishes and hopes and possible dreams for 2024 here for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I hope, and this goes back to the last segment, I hope we see more of the championship mindset, the grit, the hunger. And I know it's there for this team. It's just a matter of acting upon it. I feel like the best example, and there's still 1,000% chance of it happening because we have a lot of guys on this team from that season, 2019 into 2020. That was the hungriest I've seen this team ever. I mean, I'm not saying that they were. I just feel like maybe because they won for the first time that year, that was just so much better. And it was better because when you look at that team, what they bounced back from, and the ups and downs that you had up until obviously the stoppage because of the pandemic. But even then, kind of just going back into the playoffs and building it back up. I kind of see that in this team, after a loss, you're just building it back up, as I always like to sarcastically say on the show, now the Lightning got to figure it out and pick themselves up and get it back together. And my wishes is that we have less of those moments where this team has to pick themselves back up, because I on their best night, this team has the talent to play with anyone in the league. We've seen it. We've seen it multiple times this year. And they also have the talent, especially now with Andrei Vasilevsky being back in the picture, they have the talent to climb to the top of the standings. The Boston Bruins aren't this juggernaut of a team anymore. The Toronto Maple Leafs, I just, and I try not to be biased with the Maple Leafs, but they're just a team that, kind of like how I spoke about it the other night with the Lightning playing the Panthers. They just didn't rise up to the occasion, and the Maple Leafs are kind of a second place team, very talented, very scary team on paper. Just a team that I don't think is there yet because of goaltending. Where the Lightning do have that advantage, it's just everything else is kind of up in the air when you talk about this Lightning team on any given night. And I want to see that more. I want to see a team that goes out there and plays as one. It kind of almost felt in those two big wins of the season against Boston and Vegas. They kind of just they go out there and they play with a hive mind. They're playing as one. When everybody knows where each other is, everybody knows what each other's doing before they do it, and it's one of those things where you, as a hockey fan, and especially a Lightning fan, you wish for nights like that. And I hope to see that more. I hope to see the Lightning make the playoffs, which I think at this point they can and will do. And I would very much like to see them finish in the top 3 in the division. I think that would help them instill a little bit more confidence in themselves. And I would like to see this team go to the second round of the playoffs. I think, like I said, on their best night, they're one of the best in the league. And beyond that, whatever's fair game. If they run into a hot team in the second round and they fall, that's it. That's fine. We still got plenty of time with this core. My other wish for 2024 is I hope the Lightning and Steven Stamkos reach an agreement. That is good for everybody involved. That is friendly towards the deal, towards the team, as well as makes him happy as an individual and keeps him here for the long run. He is a huge part of this franchise, and he is by far the best player in franchise history. And I will say it until it happens. He deserves a statue outside the arena next to Dave Andreychuk. Um, and my other wish is that they go out into the NHL offseason with some money and are able to maybe sign a defenseman. I think this team is fine on its forward lines, except for maybe a couple of shuffles out here and there. But I think it's time that the Lightning go out and get a partner for Mikhail Sergachev, because Eric Chernak and Victor Hedman belong together on the same line, and that's it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. That's what needs to happen. I don't care how much success is had with this line, but if we're talking about long-term success with this Lightning team defensively, you're going to need to get Mikhail Sergachev some help. Somebody who's maybe a veteran who could help him out defensively, to where he could also focus a little bit more on his offensive game, and someone also he could learn from, because he's still very young and still not even, I don't think, has really been able to gloss over the prime of, or even get any remotely close to the prime of his career. So that's another thing. I really, yeah, I think that's probably at the top of the list, honestly, other than making the playoffs and going to the second round. I would, if they're not going to sign Stamkos, I would hope they use that money to get another defenseman, a veteran, not someone who's unproven. Love Calvin DeHaan, love Darren Radish, but you need somebody else. Personally, Nick Pervix isn't doing it for me. And he's not doing it for this Lightning team. So let me know what your wishes are in the comments below. And yeah, we'll be back in 2024. The next time you will see me, it will be a new year. And hopefully we are talking about the Lightning coming into the new year with a 2-game winning streak. So before we wrap things up, please go ahead, subscribe to the podcast, give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. Also subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you want to reach out to me, hit me up on Twitter at DankyDank, DenkyDank. Love you all, and see you in 2024. So that's been it for this episode. This last episode of 2023 of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next year.